If you're learning Japanese, you're probably the type of person to waste a ton of time. I'm gonna go over how I've been learning Japanese for over 10 years and streamline the process for you. 日本語でも話して同じ期間の勉強でどれくらいのレベルを期待できるかをお伝えします。First, here are the things we're going to be going over today. Why most people waste time learning Japanese, how I learned Japanese over 10 plus years, best way to start learning, why software like Duolingo is a waste of time for the most part, the right way to use immersion, the importance of speaking practice, how to learn kanji efficiently, how to guess words and read kanji you don't know, why you should stop using flashcards and what you should do instead, and what I think is the fastest path to fluency. First, I'll talk about how I've learned Japanese. Some of that might be applicable to you, some might not, but we're going to go over what I regret doing and what you should do instead. Like many people, I first learned about Japanese through anime. I never watched anime on TV before, but I just randomly found a slice of life anime online, was fascinated with this other place that seems so different. It was back in junior high school. There was also a strange upperclassman who played video games straight from Japan. I don't know, something about seeing those anime and then these interesting games from Japan, something just clicked in my squishy junior high brain and made me decide to start learning Japanese. I had no clue how to go about learning, but for some reason I was convinced to use Rosetta Stone. I don't know, I guess it was just more popular at the time. And eventually I got my parents to buy the Japanese version for me. You might think the modern equivalent is something like Duolingo, but I've used both for a bit, and I can say I'm happy that I went with Rosetta Stone and that Duolingo was not an option back then, because I probably would have got sucked in and just learned nothing. Rosetta Stone was a great grammatical jumpstart for me. Learned a ton of basic stuff like greetings, basic vocab, pronunciation. I can definitely recommend the version I used back then anyway for getting your feet wet in Japanese grammar and basic phrases, especially since it's gotten dirt cheap since then. Back then I think it was like $200 or something crazy, but now I think you can do a monthly plan with it, so it's worth looking into. But of course, your learning with software like that will get stale pretty quickly. I know a lot of people online disparage learning software like that altogether. My way of thinking is that you need to attack learning a language from a ton of different angles. People like to play up the learning by immersion method, but the truth is that only learning through immersion by input is actually very unnatural. Think about how people learn languages naturally. Kids, of course, get a ton of input, but then they speak. And they don't just speak in a controlled learning environment like with a language partner or a teacher or something. They learn by speaking to their family and people around them. When they say something, they're laughed at, their parents might look at them fondly, or they might actually get the response that they're looking for by saying that thing. Then they go to school, they have grammar classes, study vocab, practice writing the same word over and over again, use it in a sentence. Your language learning shouldn't be limited to any method anyone is teaching you online, including myself. It should be the most dynamic thing you ever learn because that's what's natural. Anything short of that is a major waste of time. You're going to be stunting your growth if you just attack it from one or even two strict angles. And in my opinion, getting some software to help you is a good first step, because if you can gamify learning and come back every day, at least something will stick in your head. Ideally, the software you use should be able to teach you new vocab, teach you new grammar, teach you pronunciation, test your ability to use the vocab, grammar, and pronunciation. So one thing about Rosetta Stone was that, it actually kind of measured how well you were pronouncing it. How accurate it was is up for debate. At least it got you speaking right. One thing something like Duolingo does very poorly is it gives you very obscure sentences and doesn't give you helpful phrases or common phrases up front. Be careful of that, because it's just another thing to slow down your growth. Why would you not get the most simple things that you're going to be hearing over and over in anime out of the way first? Notice that I didn't say your software should be helping you to read and write Japanese. You need to remember hiragana and katakana by yourself. You should not use software to do. This is easy enough to do within a couple of weeks for most people, I think. Just print out a chart of each with the reading, of course, and the character. Print out some practice papers and write each character enough times for you to remember each one. Say the character over and over as you're writing it, just to get it to stick in your head and associate that sound with the character. Like I said, I think this took me 2 weeks in junior high. Of course, you might not have that much free time, but say it takes you a month, you can still get it done within that amount of time. Learning hiragana and katakana, which are essentially the alphabet of Japanese, should be done almost immediately at the start of your language learning. Actually, just do this first. How would a Japanese person go about learning English without knowing the alphabet, right? But actually, it's way more important than learning the alphabet in English, because if you learn the English alphabet, you still won't know how every word is pronounced. So you could see the word, learn it, and you still wouldn't know if that's the word you registered in your mind earlier. But if you learn hiragana and katakana, you will know every way that every Japanese word can be pronounced. Basically, if you hear a Japanese word, you will know the kana for it eventually. Now, after I learned some Japanese through Rosetta Stone, brute forced hiragana and katakana, I learned some vocab on my own by just looking up words and trying to use them in a few sentence structures that I knew. I did do some immersion by just watching anime that I was going to be watching anyway because I was into anime at that time. Then, I could compare that to what I already knew, see what I recognized, what was completely unfamiliar to me. I didn't watch without English subtitles, and I know some people really place an emphasis on turning off the subtitles and just taking in the Japanese and forcing yourself to learn like that, but I don't see any value in that. Why would you leave yourself hearing a ton of new words for you to potentially learn without having a direct translation available. I mean, it's not leveraging your knowledge of your first language enough. If you see the same English over and over while you're hearing new Japanese vocab, things are going to start to link in your mind. So watch with English subtitles. Just don't forget to actually listen for the Japanese. I guess don't enjoy yourself too much. For me personally, it would be impossible to watch without learning at some point though. I know a lot of people don't even try to learn Japanese, but they just see the same thing over and over and they just naturally start associating certain sounds with the English. So you should be doing that as well. Don't try to force yourself into immersion by watching something without subtitles. So my story up until now is till the end of middle school. Then after my freshman year of high school, I did an exchange program in Japan for 3 months in the summer. It was a life-changing experience for me. I was finally able to get to go to this place I'd been seeing online and looking forward to for years prior. I loved it, but wow, I'd really underestimated how little Japanese I'd learned up until that point. I mean, I think what I was doing was useful. I could get by a little bit, but there were no fluent conversations happening. Everything took place in a rough mix of Japanese and English. But I learned really rapidly there. I was always picking up new vocab during that time, of course, because most people around me weren't native English speakers. And at that time I became pretty aware that immersion was the best way to learn. For me, that set me up to want to go back to Japan as soon as possible, of course. I was doing it because I loved my experience there more than for the language. I've never just been in love with the language or loved how it sounded or anything. But there wasn't any doubt from that point that being fluent was just a matter of time. Then a couple of years later, my family hosted a Japanese exchange student for a year. Of course, during that time we spoke pretty much daily and I could bounce any Japanese I was learning off of him as he was learning English from my family. Well, he was learning English from society at large, right? There have been very few days of my life since that period that I wasn't directly speaking Japanese to someone. If it's at all possible for you, you need to put people in your life who you can regularly speak Japanese to. The best part about speaking to someone daily because of their proximity to you is that eventually you just completely stop worrying about your ability and you start spewing whatever you know to get your point across. You start mimicking that person's mannerisms subconsciously also, which makes you closer to a native speaker in tone and word choice, rather than just watching some pop culture or anime all the time and starting to sound like a character. This pattern of being around people who I almost exclusively spoke Japanese to continued throughout my life, whether it be with other foreigner friends who weren't native English speakers, studying Japanese together and that was our bridge language, my best friend when I was working a part-time job here in Japan at 7-Eleven, or eventually my wife, who spoke almost no English at the time. By exposing yourself to a wide variety of people like this, you also get to round out your mannerisms, so you don't just end up speaking like an anime character or some trope of a certain type of person that you may latch onto. You know, if you're speaking to old Japanese men all day, you're probably gonna use outdated, Showa era Japanese and maybe some slang that just most young people would never use. So speak to as many different types of people as you can. After high school, I went to language school in Shinjuku. By this time, I was really caught up on some conversational Japanese. I could say things I wanted or needed in my daily life. I could generally describe the world around me, but I was still pretty far from fluency and my reading was pretty dismal. I couldn't read any novels or anything, but I could skim some manga. Like many people, kanji was still one of my weak points. Up until that point, I'd been learning kanji from a book that contained something like the 2,000 most common kanji or something like that. I was just choosing what to learn at random, and generally I just steered towards the simpler kanji. Probably encountered most all of the radicals that I would later need. During my time at language school though, I learned the importance of structured learning. Yeah, my teachers were great, but language learning wise, my main takeaway was how great textbooks could be for providing you a clear path to leveling up your knowledge. I don't remember the exact names of the textbooks I used. They changed each trimester and with a teacher that was teaching us at that level of Japanese, but they would be based on a JLPT level and would have pretty much everything you need to pass that JLPT level within the book. The grammar was very simple to learn with plenty of examples. I think if you get a few examples of any grammar structure, sentence structure, you'll be able to learn it. For the kanji though, we were required to write out each kanji we were learning several times and we would have a test on it. Nothing special, but just raw practice like that with a test at the end works well enough for me. For me, this external pressure to keep going is really important. That's why I would recommend language school to anyone who isn't 100% self-motivated like me. So to recap a bit thus far, here's what you need to be doing. Memorize hiragana and katakana up front. Brute force memorize them within the first few weeks of learning Japanese. Start some kind of software that you can stick with every other day for a year. Ideally something that doesn't just have you guessing translations. Don't just go for the cheapest or free option. Look around. You shouldn't have to spend too much, but you want to get some quality program. Get a book of kanji, Don't do like I did. Start with JLPT N5, then go up to N4, etc. Don't just jump around randomly there because I think they structure them in a pretty good way. Even though handwriting is almost completely unnecessary nowadays, write them out by hand. It will help you remember. This is how all Japanese students learn kanji anyway, right? So you're just doing the most standard, natural way to learn them, in my opinion. Start a Japanese grammar textbook based on the JLPT level. Combine this with the kanji book based on that same JLPT level. Start speaking to someone regularly, at least a few times per week. Ideally, someone who's a native speaker. That's gonna be the hardest part, is finding someone to practice with who's actually competent in Japanese. From the worst case scenario, when you can't find someone to talk to regularly, substitute some Japanese media for the listening part. I guess it could be anime. Ideally something that's closer to life, maybe a drama. You still need to talk to people and get feedback eventually. Once you've done the software for a while, just drop it. It can only take you so far. You need to replace that with the harder to find thing, a native speaker. Aside from the software, keep doing everything for each level of JLPT. You'll get there quickly if you attack on all fronts. Like I said, the most important thing is to just be trying many things at the same time and sticking to a few of them that work for you, but they're all gonna work for you. I mean, you're gonna get knowledge from all fronts. Now, to get into the advanced levels of kanji learning, as a beginner, you might be thinking that thousands of kanji is this insurmountable wall that you'll never be able to get over. Fortunately, that isn't the case at all. I was thinking the same way when I started. Once you get enough kanji under your belt, you'll start to be able to combine them to make brand new words without even having to look them up. It sounds kind of unbelievable at first, but I mean literally you can just slap two kanji together a lot of the times if you know the reading for both of them and their general meaning. For example, the other day I wanted to say directly below. I knew the word for chokusetsu, which means directly. The word for below, shita, it can also be read as ka. So I just wrote in a message, chokka, and it turned out to be an actual word meaning directly below. Now what's more, your keyboard will actually give you feedback on if you're right or not, because if you type in the hiragana and then push spacebar, if it translates to the word you're predicting, you know you're probably right. There are countless instances where I've guessed harder combinations, but I barely even think of them anymore at this point, and you'll be able to get there someday too. So don't be discouraged by this huge wall of kanji that everyone says is really difficult to learn. Even if you don't know the kanji in front of you, you'll also be able to start guessing the reading based on what the radical is. Admittedly though, this has a higher miss rate for me, but it helps when you're trying to look up how the kanji is actually pronounced and what it means. If you have a rough idea, oh, other similar looking kanjis sound like this, so try that first reading that comes to your mind and you'll probably get some hits online. A lot of people like to word mine and add new words they find to a memorization deck for practice, but for me that's always felt too tedious, and so I never did it. I just keep a Japanese dictionary app downloaded on my phone. Whenever I'm needed to look up a word, I just pull it up in this dictionary that is offline, so it's super snappy and fast and I can use it whenever. It's right next to my thumb. It's literally the easiest app to access on my phone, and it's been that way for over 10 years. The ease of use is super important. You know, you see a Japanese word you're even slightly interested in, you can just look it up in like 5 seconds. Even if you have to look up the same word 2 times because you forgot, you won't have to look it up a third, or maybe in the worst case, the 4th time, right? Probably have it memorized. And you won't have to maintain a memorization app, something like Anki, where you're putting in the cards each time and remembering it. All that goes out the window, and just have your dictionary ready to go at all times. Judge for yourself how good you are at learning new words though. For me, this system's been working well for a long time. 今日紹介したかった内容はこれで以上です。何について話せばいいかな。10年間ぐらい勉強すれば、これほど日本語話せるようになるし、なんか日本語のコンテンツを見てると理解できないコンテンツはなかなかないかな。正直自分あんまり勉強してないんですよね。新しい言葉習ってるんですけど、アクセントの改善とかすごいはっきり発音してとかはあんまりしようとしてなくてですね、そこは改善するべき点かなって思ってます。正直みんなに理解してもらえるんだったらあんまり頑張る気にならない。性格悪いな。Anyway, I have no clue what to talk about in Japanese, but like I was saying, you can probably get way better than me. You have your head down studying. I have no trouble communicating, so I think 10 years you'll have no trouble communicating as well, and you'll be able to understand anything you want to if you just keep your head down and study, but also go out and talk to Japanese people always, as much as you can. Let me know your thoughts and secrets about learning Japanese down below. Come on over to the Discord if you're interested in learning Japanese. Thanks for watching. Bye.